get some analysis on the situation now with Lincoln Mitchell, an associate professor at Columbia University's Institute for Russian and European Studies, joins us from New York. And so let me ask you about the U.S. options. What are the U.S. options in trying to reverse the Russian presence in Crimea? And is there anything they can do to force Russia to pull troops back?
Well, the U.S. options are the things we've heard discussed. There's sanctions, there's travel restrictions, but those are the right things for the United States to do, but they're not going to be enough to force Russia to do anything. If full involvement of Europe with those sanctions, that might be able to move Russia a little bit, but there's little evidence that that's going to happen. So some kind of negotiation is essential, but also Russia has a strong hand now in the very short term. In the longer term, they have their own problems. What do they do with Crimea? What do they do if they have to go further into eastern Ukraine? Do they really want to have an occupying force there? How do they sustain that? So I think Russia has to think through what their long-term strategy is here as well.
Does it mean from the West and from the U.S. point of view, it would make perhaps more sense to focus on convincing Russia to draw a line in terms of their presence right now to essentially prevent them from going further into eastern Ukraine?
Well, yes and no, because you definitely want to prevent them from going further into eastern Ukraine. But secondly, you don't want to really legitimize what is kind of a land grab, right? To go send some troops into Crimea and secure it and then say, hey, we've got it. On the other hand, that may in fact have been what's happened, and the West has to find a way to recognize that without recognizing the legitimacy of the action. But this is the new reality in which we live, at least for now.
Is there anything the U.S. can do to perhaps bring about a face-saving way for President Vladimir Putin to withdraw from the Crimea in favor of international monitors?
Well, the first thing that the U.S. could do is to create a climate where that's even possible, right? So every time some one-time or future presidential aspirant gets up and compares Putin to Hitler, right? Every time the Secretary of State comes on television and makes these statements as if the United States has some extraordinary moral high ground, it legitimately generates a reaction in the Russian leadership that moves them away from the negotiating table, recognizing that although in my view Russia is wrong, they do have interests, that their view of the recent events in Ukraine, while I don't agree with it, and I don't think the United States government agrees with it, there is some legitimacy, there is something to be discussed there. This notion that the Western narrative of what happened in Ukraine is, hey, it was a great democratic revolution and this authoritarian was ousted. Well, the truth lies somewhere in between the Russian and American interpretations, and to be able to recognize that at least we're talking about different interests, not the next Hitler, might make it possible to negotiate. But until we get that far, I don't think it's even possible.
Good to get your analysis. Thanks very much. Lincoln Mitchell, Associate Professor at Columbia University Institute for Russian and European Studies, live for us in New York. So I'll be back with more from Europe a bit later on, including